I lost my career, my marriage, and my life, all because of one woman. I'm sorry if this post sounds like rambling, but I just need somewhere to share this. I, 22F, have spent the last 9 months being stalked by a woman from Facebook, 26F, because I didn't let her sleep with my husband, 27M. My husband I met through an online forum. There's probably 2K people who know of it, but only 150 or so active participants at any given time, most of whom have been in it for at least 5 years. It ended up migrating to Facebook and Discord due to ease of use. A few years before I met my husband, I ended up becoming close with a woman I'm going to call May for this post. We were in one of the many smaller Discords together, and as this group tends to be male-dominated, we formed almost a sisterly bond. We spoke every day for years and shared absolutely everything with each other, including very personal traumas. There was a point where I was even on her mom's AT&T account despite never having hung out with her in person. I'm neurodivergent. I have autism, so our online friendship was the closest friendship I had. May have been dating a guy who she'd met in the same circle, Brian, for around 2 years. Brian, while a great guy in personality, struggled heavily with alcoholism and had trouble keeping a job. As much as we loved him, May had been funding his entire lifestyle, and it started to take a toll on her. While she agreed that she didn't have any future with him, she absolutely refused to leave. She ended up messaging my husband, Paul, on Messenger to ask for advice from both the perspective of a man and someone who had been a friend of his. This is apparently where it started. I didn't have any reservations about May talking to Paul. She had been my close friends for years, and I had already introduced her to multiple previous boyfriends without issue. She had also been messaging me frequently to coordinate wedding plans, even buying plane tickets to travel to be my bridesmaid. It was incredibly important, as this would be both the first time we met and a very special event in my life. However, at some point, May started shifting the conversation with Paul to wedding plans instead of her relationship problems. Instead of making travel plans with me, she started repeatedly asking that my husband arrange everything because I was too stressed with the rest of the wedding. Paul deferred everything back to me the first few times. When she saw that she shifted, during the same time period, I was recovering from a complicated pregnancy loss that resulted in me having multiple surgeries. I went into a very deep depression afterwards and wasn't feeling my best self emotionally or physically. My husband has always struggled with both anxiety and autism, and that only heightened things. We began fighting more than normal. While things were still okay, they absolutely weren't perfect. May had been privy to everything that had been going on in our lives, and I felt comfortable venting to her when we got into arguments. When Paul denied her request to make travel plans, she ended up shifting to the topic of our arguments. From what I saw in their conversations, May initially brought up how something I had messaged her sounded weird, that maybe something was off with me, and it didn't sound like something he would say. She was technically telling the truth, as she had taken a sentence I said out of context and cropped the screenshot to remove any explanation I had offered on it. Paul was hesitant to believe her, but the next morning, he came back to ask again out of fear. Within the span of weeks, May had convinced Paul that I was cheating and looking for a discreet way of canceling the wedding without telling him I had an affair partner. As she was my best friend, my husband took her at face value. She would often crop things out of context or twist events I had told her and retell them to him, framing them as weird and suspicious. Despite it all, Paul refused to leave me until he had concrete proof that I had been cheating. Instead, May switched back to bringing up travel plans. Rather than the girls' night we had planned, her goals shifted to drinks and a movie with Paul. She talked about how she would comfort him and give him a much-needed break, taking him to all his favorite places. She would follow it up by sending him Spotify songs that reminded her of him, calling him cute, and texting him good morning. The worst part wasn't even the cheating. She had tried to tell him I had actually aborted our child, and that the miscarriage was a plea for sympathy. While Paul shut down this multiple times, it had clearly been planted in his head. I started to notice something had shifted in Paul. Instead of my usual attentive husband, he stopped participating in wedding planning. He spent most of the day glued to his phone. I begged for communication, but he would pretend to be oblivious to whatever I was complaining about. Our fights shifted from spats as a result of heavy emotion and into accusations of me acting suspicious or being untrustworthy. A lot of these days are a blur to me now. In a moment of weakness, I went through his phone. That's where I found all of the messages he had sent with May. There had been quite a few suggestive text messages mixed in with what May had sent him. While Paul did not acknowledge them, it had absolutely been an emotional affair and an attempt at a physical one on her part. He acknowledged this, and we spent a long time talking. The conversation was productive, but the scars of arguing with my husband about whether the baby was even his or if I had lost it on purpose will never, ever leave my head. My husband and I ended up pursuing couples counseling to discuss what led to this. We found out through a therapist that this most definitely fit the bill for incredible manipulation, if not brainwashing. He had been convinced I had been cheating on him and was waiting for the other shoe to drop at any moment. His reaction had been mostly sane for someone who fully believed these things to be true. I ended up leaving many of our discords and group chats. I reached out to May's partner, Brian, and informed him of the situation. Initially, May pretended this was 100% Paul's fault and the affair was totally one-sided. However, as soon as I messaged Brian, the conversation changed. May sent me multiple long paragraphs detailing how I should commit suicide and I was a compulsive liar, making up things that never happened. Brian responded with hostility, insisting I had been the one who cheated. I messaged a few of our mutual friends to ask for advice and received an insane amount of screenshots of May telling them I had been engaged in an affair. The dates on them went back long before she'd ever mentioned the idea to Paul. She had even named specific people and places. Luckily, all of the people she named were also in the community and able to provide an alibi that not only did it not happen, but most often we were on opposite sides of the country on the date she named. When this avenue failed, May made multiple long Facebook posts about how I was witch-hunting her because I ruined my own marriage by cheating. I deleted my Facebook, choosing not to engage. Normally that ends things like, but for the last 9 months, every single day. May has made at least one post detailing a similar story to her initial posts. She accused me of using her to cover up my affair, using drugs, and abusing my husband. The posts happened so often that I started tuning them out by default. People would often provide me with screenshots, but I simply ignored them. That seemed to only anger her farther, as things continued to escalate. Paul and I continued on with our wedding after much discussion. However, the night before, we received multiple calls to our cake and food vendors impersonating me and telling them we had called it off. She even attempted to pay cancellation fees, but was thwarted only because we had to come in person to void the contract. After we had managed to figure out the situation with the wedding vendors, May called the police. She insinuated to others and the cops that I was underage and my husband was sexually abusing me. Specifically, she had claimed I was 16 and only my husband knew, as he was happily abusing me in order to help me cover up the fact I was lying about my age to have affairs with other adult men. Due to me entering the community when I was underage and being younger than many other members, some of them believed her. When she had convinced them enough, they turned on her for not calling the cops. This resulted in a visit from our local police department, as well as a call from the state police as she'd contacted internet crimes against children. I was easily able to prove my age, but the police report she made only convinced people further, as it seemed like evidence. By this point, I acknowledged that this was internet drama and there was nothing I could do but turn off my phone. Once the police report was cleared, I deleted any trace of myself left on the internet and decided to try reaching out to people in person. Instead, May retained an attorney. She alleged that I had doxed her online and that people had shown up to her home, threatening her as a result. With her new attorney in tow, she emailed both my job and the college I was attending telling them that I was being charged with harassment. I study nursing and I work with children who have developmental disabilities. In my state, you can't work or attend school for either of these things if you possess a criminal record. Any kind of allegation of this sort is incredibly serious and enough to get you expelled. I had to file my own police report and pleaded with both institutions to believe me. While the police were unable to do anything, as May lived in another state and it was out of the jurisdiction, I was able to provide a police report I had made about her to both and get my name cleared. However, the continued calls to my workplace meant that I was asked to quit for the safety of the children. Losing my job broke me. My profession was my passion, and I struggled to find meaningful work due to my autism. Saying it gutted me is a complete understatement. I was pissed. May had also claimed to work in a daycare for children with disabilities and pursuing her own degree in early childhood education. I had enough and decided to report her to both her job and her own school. While I had the addresses for both, neither claimed to recognize her. I ended up spending an entire weekend calling around to different agencies and universities within 4 hours of her address. None had ever heard of her. In the state she lives in, educators and people working with children have to sign up for a registry. She had never been entered onto it. I looked back through our conversation and found that May's story of what she did changed often. Particularly, I noticed that when I entered my field, May had changed from working in a Montessori school to working with children with disabilities. Before, she had claimed to be studying biology and shifted it to childhood education when I expressed that I was considering the same field. The more I read, the more I noticed the same pattern of behavior. When I mentioned a band, May would parrot having interests in the same things. If I had a hobby, she would slowly start telling others she was even better than me at the same activity. After a week of obsessing over it, I realized May had never even told me one thing she was interested in that I hadn't brought up first. We had been friends for years, and I couldn't name a single personality trait, interest, or hobby that was unique to her. We spent hours on voice call, texting every day, and it was her agreeing with me before coming back a week later to announce that actually she had thought that before I had ever even said it. I started to actually lose my mind. Between the constant harassment, pregnancy loss, and couples counseling, I felt like I was going insane. I had long since been off the internet, and I couldn't escape her. I decided to come back to Facebook and announce my findings with all of the screenshots of the emotional affair included. I was met with a lot of support. A few other women would come out, sharing that May had done similar things to their partners or had been catty to them in the past. Our mutual friends would thank me for sharing and ask what they could do to help this stop. I don't think I've ever felt so supported in my life, but none of the support stopped her. Within a week of reactivating my Facebook, I had another woman making posts about me. We had been in the same community, but she rarely was active, so I was not well acquainted with her. She made 10 or so posts, mostly insulting my appearance and repeating similar phrases to May. She thanked God that my child was dead because there was no need for more of my genetics on this planet. While I had too much going on to pay proper attention to her, and she had me blocked, it was relayed to me that her own husband had admitted to cheating but wouldn't admit with who. An anonymous account reached out to her, claiming to be me and that I was the affair partner. Doubly, I started receiving calls and texts to my phone number often from men claiming they'd spoke with me on hookup sites and that I was looking to share photos and meet up. I felt I had little left at this point. I couldn't engage with my support system, lost my job, and left college to avoid any more trouble. I spent much of my time locked in the house and forced to clean to try not to think about it. I had attempted going to the police twice more and was told that there was nothing that could be done. I couldn't afford to hire my own attorney. Brian would reach out to me via email, explaining to me that May had been confirmed to be cheating on him. One of our other friend's partner had left his girlfriend, and they had begun dating just hours later. When he refused to give her attention after she messaged his mother and childhood friends calling him a drug addict, she attempted to report him for revenge porn. As vindicated as I was that this was not a unique experience, it had been 9 months since I confronted Paul about the text messages, and they had never once slowed. No matter how much or little attention I gave her, it kept going. I wish I had a concrete way to end this, but unfortunately, May has made 2 separate posts about me today. I am lost on what more there is to do. Without a job, I can't hire a lawyer, and even then, it's hard to do with us living in different states. I feel so isolated and cut off from the world. My marriage will likely dissolve as a result of the strain this has put on our trust, regardless of therapy. I'm not sure what there is left to do. Update. Trigger warning for discussion of a failed suicide attempt, pregnancy loss. I took the advice of many of you in my initial post and reported May to the FBI. I received a case number and hoped to update when I had more information on their end, but this has been a slow process. Regardless, too much has happened for me to not update. May has continued her usual behavior over the last 20 days. I thought I was beginning to cope with the situation well. We had even discovered that I was pregnant, something I believed impossible, but was nonetheless grateful for. We moved 800 miles away from our family and friends for my husband's career and attempted to make a new life on the other side of the country. However, he sent me a file over Discord last week. It was a 6-page PDF file titled Upon an Altar Within a Covenant. It was unexpected and cryptic, but he assured me it was crucial that I read all of it completely. The file was a long-form confessional. It began detailing his earlier relationships and how he had been conflict avoidant, often leading to unnecessary fights and even cheating on his prom date by ghosting her rather than breaking up with her. I understood that we are human, and sometimes that means doing hurtful things to others. I tried to comfort him while I was reading it, hold him, but he pressed me to read on. I am prolonging admitting it because I am unsure how to phrase it. In short, I have been lied to by many people. There was not just an emotional affair between the two of them. He described long plans to have May move her RV onto our property. They had discussed my infertility issues and decided to remedy the situation by having a long-term affair in which he impregnated her repeatedly and passed the children off as the products of one-night stands, so I would raise the kids but never question them. They tore me apart, resenting me over my health issues after the miscarriage and how I'd become paralyzed in anxiety and lazy. I wish I could say that I knew my worth right then, but I spent multiple hours staring at the wall in silence. I couldn't muster up the ability to scream. That evening I miscarried again. The following days, I pleaded with him to tell me he was making it up. I begged him to love me and the children we had buried together. He remained completely cold and spoke to me in monotone sentences. He told me he had waited to tell me until after we had moved because he knew I would have left him before, but now we were capable of building a life together and letting go of the past. After 4 days, I lost my mind. I'm not proud of it, but I threatened him constantly. I tried to file for divorce. I signed up for dating apps. I began plotting with May's recent ex to stage an affair, record us having sex, and send it to the two of them. I destroyed our belongings. I tore down every piece of who he was, contacted his family, and made fun of him on Facebook. He stayed cold. On Thursday, he told me in the same flat tone of voice that he couldn't wait until I was gone because he had missed the excitement of having sex with other women. He graphically described everything he loved about them, what he was incapable of receiving from me, how I had slandered him our entire marriage and blamed him for something that was entirely my fault. I am not proud of it, but I watched myself break that day. I have lost 2 children, a career, an education, my sanity. I attempted to take my own life. I informed everyone that I was too broken to be safe alone and that I'd be leaving for a crisis center that night. Instead, I stayed home. I was medically deceased for 4 minutes and 35 seconds. I had to be intubated and aspirated into my lungs. I do not remember anything that happened that day, the day after, or the day after that. I do know that I was only saved because I had accidentally dialed a friend in another country. He picked up, listened to me sob, and heard as I lost consciousness. He used a Google Voice number to call for an ambulance and saved my life. My state has laws about involuntary psych holds that had me placed in a crisis center once I recovered physically. The first day, I attempted to call my husband from the pay phones in the center, but struggled to figure out the numbers as I was still delirious and nodding out. I was able to dial the number to my father and ask for him to put us on a 3-way call so I could get some clothes. I was met with screaming. He told me that no, he couldn't call Paul, as he had changed his number and left the state with every bit of money and belongings we had. He yelled that I had lost my mind, plotted to murder my husband, and that this was all my fault. I didn't know what to do. I was barely awake and had no idea what he's shrieking about. I hung up the phone and curled into a ball for 12 hours. The staff assisted me in calling every mutual friend I could think of, but Paul had deleted his social media the night I attempted to take my life. No one could validate what was being said, and I was left to accept that I was completely alone. The next morning, Paul randomly called the hospital, sounding annoyed. He had no idea what I was talking about and told me his number was the same as it had always been. He informed me that he had made the entire story about the children, the affair, and May living with us up to instigate a divorce because I had become unbearable. He thought I knew that. I called my father back, hoping for some kind of rational voice. I was met with more screaming. The therapists attempted to pre-form couples counseling between my husband and I. I sat in silence as Paul laid out his complaints about my inability to communicate. They had no choice but to send me home with him, as I had nowhere else to go. I came home to find I was unable to call most of my family. My sister was the only one to respond, begging me not to speak to her because she knew what I did and she didn't want to see me like this. I learned over time that many of them were told I had made a serious, detailed plan to murder Paul. I was actively using drugs. I had become physically abusive. Whatever letter I was speaking about wasn't real, and I was suffering from a psychotic break as a result of my most recent miscarriage. Paul had taken my phone while I was gone and spoken to my family on my behalf. He edited or deleted social media posts, messaged multiple people off my phone to correct my lies, and spent 3 hours on the phone with Brian using my number. May had taken this time to mock me online for being a pathetic junkie who overdosed like she had already told everyone I was. I was forced to reconcile with Paul due to my recent attempt labeling me too dangerous to be alone and the lack of money I had to leave. The only support I had left was Brian and the friend I called the night of the attempt. The two of them helped me contact my sister. I screen shared every text conversation between Paul and I, allowing her to read everything. She believed that I was right about the letter, but that I was still suffering some kind of mental break. I posted every possible screenshot or piece of information about Paul and made it any social media account I had. I tried to file another police report, but my recent hospitalization meant they doubted my credibility. I attempted to flee with what money I could find, but Paul was able to call the same police department and have them bring me back. That is where we are now. Hopefully the next update I will provide you all will have some happy ending about how I got divorced, fled them both, and lived happily ever after. I'm not sure how long that will take, especially considering I need to be a resident of this state for at least a year before I can file for divorce here. Any further suggestions would be appreciated.